So we've been discussing the general principles of fast swimming and specifically how to create a lot of propulsion. So the previous skill we discussed how to create a really large surface area and what that looks like. Here we're going to discuss how athletes use that large surface area and move a lot of water backwards for a long period of time. So what we're going to look for and try to see are the different positions that athletes achieve in different strokes and how those positions allow them to move water backwards for a long period of time by creating a surface area that's oriented backwards for a long period of time. So first, we're going to look at sprint freestyle. So what we'll see here is from this position, more or less right here, all the way through the back of the stroke, that arm is oriented backwards. And as you see here, the relationship with the upper arm and the forearm changes, but the forearm and the hand continue to move backwards, directly backwards, all the way until right about there. And so what's happening with each stroke is athletes are orienting the arm backwards and then they're moving that position backwards for as long as they can. And they're changing the configuration of the elbow and the hand or and the upper arm so that they can continue to do so. If we watch the other athlete beneath him, you'll see enter here, set it up, and then they're moving backwards throughout that whole stroke cycle. And there's a pretty good orientation throughout the whole stroke, as you can see there. So we'll look at a different sprint athlete here, and they take a little bit of a different approach. And what you'll notice is that the front half of the stroke is not quite as effective as the other athlete, and especially compared to some distance athletes. But what happens is the arm is oriented backwards a little bit later, but it gets much deeper. And the back part of the stroke, there's a much more horizontal or backwards orientation for longer, and that orientation is deeper. And so there's not quite as effective an orientation in the front of the stroke. However, this athlete in particular is able to move water backwards for a long period of time in the back part of the stroke. So now we'll turn to distance athletes in freestyle, and you can see here orientation backwards, and then that position is maintained throughout the back part of the stroke. And so there's a long period of time where the forearm and the hand is moving water directly backwards. So throughout the majority of the stroke, it's oriented towards creating a backwards propulsion. See the same thing here with this athlete. So again, throughout that entire period, oriented backwards, right there, right there. And then finally with this athlete, you can see backwards orientation from this point and then held throughout the whole back part of the stroke. It's not just about creating an effective position, it's about maintaining that position for as long as possible throughout the whole stroke so that athletes can move a lot of water backwards for a long period of time, thereby creating speed. So we'll take a look at the same principles here for backstroke. So again, the forearm is and the hand is oriented backwards. There's a big surface area, and then throughout the whole stroke, it's moved directly backwards. And so it's not just that this position is achieved for a brief period of time, it's held throughout the whole stroke for a long period of time. So for each stroke, the athlete's creating a big surface area and then maintaining that surface area all the way through the back of the stroke. So same thing from a different angle here. You can see now there's that orientation backwards and then directed backwards throughout the entire stroke. Again, on the other side, and then straight back through there. And so it's a big surface area held for a long period of time with each stroke, which is going to create a lot of propulsion, which is going to create a lot of speed. So one last angle here. See big surface area moved all the way backwards. You can see that with the athlete behind. Again, they've achieved a big surface area, and now they're going to move that directly backwards throughout the whole stroke as well. Now we'll take a look at it with butterfly, and you can see good position here, and then it's maintained throughout the back part of the stroke. So it's again a big surface area moved for a long period of time. So it's again not just creating the surface area, not creating the positions, but maintaining that throughout the entire stroke cycle to really create speed. See that here, good position, and then held all the way through, right there. Good position, held all the way through throughout the entire stroke. Another athlete here, again, strong positions, held throughout the entire stroke. big surface area for a long period of time. Now, with underwater kicking, things are happening faster and the range of motion is going to be smaller, but the same principles apply. So if we watch this athlete here, again, big surface area and it's maintained for as long as possible within the constraints of the lower body. And obviously, because the kick rates are much higher than the stroke rates you see in swimming, there's not going to be as much water moved with each stroke. And so the surface areas are not going to be, so the surface areas aren't going to be sustained as long as they are with the arms. However, the longer they can be sustained, the more speed they'll create. And you can see some of these athletes are pretty effective. This first athlete was an Olympic champion and elite, certainly one of the best underwater dolphin kickers at the time. And you can see there's a big surface area and it's maintained for a pretty long period of time. Again, here, another athlete, and this is the best orientation, and then it's trying to maintain it, especially the orientation of the feet, for as long as possible. So when athletes have really flexible ankles, they're going to be more effective at doing so. Again, here, really good position, and then it's maintained for as long as possible within the constraints of the anatomy of the lower limbs. So same principles, even if it's achieved in a different manner than the upper body. So now with breaststroke kicking, so that's an effective position, and to try to maintain that, again, as long as possible. And so the orientation of the foot pointed outwards and facing back, the goal is to create it and hold it for as long as possible. And there are limitations of the structures of the legs, so that it can't be held indefinitely. The goal is to create it as long as possible and for as effectively as possible. So the athlete here, you can see the feet turn out, and they're staying turned out until the end of the kick. So the longer that they can maintain that position, the more effective they're going to be at creating propulsion. Same thing for here. You can see feet are turned out in these athletes and they're trying to sustain it, especially right there on the left. You can see that position that they achieve and they hold. And the more swimmers can hold those positions for longer, they're going to be able to create more propulsion. Same thing here. You can see these athletes are keeping the feet pointed out for as long as they can. Now, when it comes to the breaststroke pull, you can see a really strong orientation throughout that position, and they're holding it as long as possible. Now, the difference between breaststroke and the other strokes is that the athletes can't pull down through the hips. And so part of that propulsion gets cut off a little bit sooner than otherwise would. It's still maintained for as long as possible within the context of the stroke and the limitations of the upper body. So from here to here, there's a really strong pulling action, and the backwards orientation is maintained for a long period of time. See the same thing with this athlete. So again, really great orientation, and then pulled straight back all the way so that the elbows come close to the body, and then the pull is cut off because they have to recover the arms earlier. However, for that long period of time, as long as possible, again, within the context of the stroke and the structures of the shoulders, really great position, pulling backwards for as long as possible. It's not just an instant where these positions are achieved, they're maintained for a significant period of time. So hopefully you're able to see how important it is for certain positions to be achieved and how those positions need to be sustained for a long period of time to create as much propulsion as possible. So what athletes are doing are relatively early in the stroke, they're achieving positions with the limbs that are oriented backwards so that water can be moved backwards, so that swimmers can be moved forwards. And then those positions are being achieved for as long as possible within the strokes. And that's what's really key is that one, it's really important to establish great positions, which a lot of swimmers are unable to do. It's not just achieving those positions briefly, they need to be sustained for an extended period of time. And that's what's so critical for fast swimming and creating a lot of propulsion is great positions for long periods of time so that athletes can move a lot of water backwards so that they can move forwards.